All right. My mic working okay? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making it out on Thursday afternoon. re:Invent's winding down. Hope we're going to have some fun demos today. So I'm a senior manager of product at AWS Amplify. And today we're going to be talking about a product that was launched earlier on today, Amplify Studio. I don't know, how many of you heard Werner's keynote? Show of hands. OK, a lot of you. Great. So we're going to be talking about Amplify Studio. I was told, don't do a live demo, but I was like, YOLO, let's do a live demo. So I'll be doing a live demo of the capabilities. But really, what I'm going to be doing today is I'm really here to talk about Amplify as a whole, right? So how is Amplify making it easy for front-end developers to go from idea to a production scalable app fast? Right, so before I kind of get into what Amplify is, let's actually maybe spend some time talking about what front-end development really is. Right, so front-end developers are typically responsible for building what users see. Oftentimes, it's the first touch point with end users and a business. Right, so it's a very important job and a very important role. And users access business apps through the web and through mobile. The market is growing. As of latest estimates, it's as big as 24 million front-end developers, where you got 14 million web developers and 10 million mobile developers. So why don't we actually pause and talk a little bit about the evolution of the front-end space? Let's start way back in 1989. Tim Berners-Lee conceptualized the World Wide Web with two very key kind of fundamental building blocks. You got HTML, right, which is pretty much ubiquitous with what we see on the web now, and HTTP, which is a protocol for request response. It's how the web works, really. And then fast forward to the mid-90s, JavaScript and CSS launched, adding more capabilities to style your UI. And JavaScript, you were able to inject scripts at runtime to control your application behavior. And this obviously evolved in the early 2000s, where you had both Ajax and jQuery. jQuery is not as jQuery is still the most popular JavaScript library on the web. Surprisingly, I found that out while researching this. But jQuery really gave a framework to manipulate the DOM, right, in a simpler way for developers. And Ajax allowed you to re-render UI when there were changes to data. I don't know how many of you remember Gmail when it first launched, and how cool it was to sit there and watch a new email come in without having to refresh your browser. That was thanks to Ajax. EC2, not really front-end specific, but very important, right? Because it enabled businesses and startups to be able to build web applications or mobile applications much faster, because you no longer had to really invest in servers. And then we had the launch of the iPhone that really conceptualized the idea of an app. That's where more on that later. I highlight Node.js because Node.js then with JavaScript, it allowed you to run JavaScript on the front end and the back end. And then we really started with the JavaScript frameworks. React wasn't the first. I was a Backbone user back in the day. I think Backbone was one of the first frameworks, but don't quote me on that. But React really helped drive a whole movement towards componentization, the componentization of apps, where components manage their own state. And then we had, on the back end, EC2 evolved to serverless. We had AWS Lambda launch in 2015. And since then, we've had a number of serverless offerings where now you don't really need to manage your backend servers as your traffic scales. So how did that actually impact what end users saw in applications or worked with, right? So in the 90s, this is what the 90s looked like: static content, hyperlinks. I think we're going to go back to some of that retro design soon. I don't know, anyone here remember GeoCities? I had 10 GeoCities websites. That's why I threw it out there. And then enter the 2000s, Enter the 2000s, more user-driven content. Social media took off. The innocent days of social media. You had Facebook, YouTube, where content was generated by users, and applications became a little more complex. 2007 was the launch of the iPhone. Again, iPhone was not the first smartphone out there. Big shout out to Palm OS and BlackBerry as well. Like those were the pioneers. But the iPhone really popularized the concept of an app, and it also changed the model in which we, as users, interact with applications. Apps were fast, they were performant, they were feature-rich, they had device context, so there was a lot of complexity that went into the app. And the natural progression were web apps, which is where we're at today. Last time you used a web apps have become very performant as well. I have Airbnb as an example here. If you use the Airbnb web app versus the mobile app, it's very hard to actually see the big gap between web and mobile at this point. Same for Spotify, right? So what led to this improvement on web? Frameworks such as React, right, popularized single-page applications. Now we're seeing a movement of things going back to the server with SSR apps, but it's still a hybrid model, right? Where JavaScript handles a lot more logic in the client side instead of round tripping to the server for every request. So you click on something on a page, you automatically go there. There's no browser reload. You add something to your cart, check out badge updates. Browsers became more powerful, faster. We have things like IndexedDB now, so we can store data locally, caches. Cloud computing obviously took off, right? So storing data and leveraging cloud services made it easier to build scalable apps, and that's kind of where Amplify really has been trying to fit in. So the end user expectations from web apps. So really, this is all driven at the end of the day by end users. We're using our phones when we were using apps on our phones, we switch to web, we want a similar experience. We want to have the same features. We want to have a fast experience. So how have these changes really impacted the responsibilities of a front-end developer? So here's this. If you look at the entire stack, this is a shout out to Chris Coyier from CSS Tricks. I don't know if any of you follow him, but this is actually his image. It starts, if you look at the back end and the front end, right, you go from database, servers, server-side languages, APIs, frameworks, JavaScript, CSS, HTML. Traditionally, like front-end developers would only focus on that part right there. And there's been some key innovations, obviously, that I walked through in the previous slide that have made the back end more palatable as well. For servers, you don't need to think about servers anymore. You have a whole bunch of serverless options, so you can, and then on server-side languages, similarly, Node. So you can have JavaScript in the front end, you can have JavaScript in the back end. GraphQL is a big evolution for front-end developers because it allowed front-end developers to query for the data they want in the shape that they want, and then write data as well. All these technological advancements really have led to front-end developers being able to build more full-stack functionality. We're at a point now where a front-end developer can really go from building the UI all the way to building the cloud infrastructure and connecting the two together. So that's why we built Amplify. Amplify has been around since 2017. And we built Amplify to make it, we launched as a client JavaScript library, and then we've added a whole bunch of tools since then. We built Amplify to make it easy for front-end developers to build full-stack apps. Actually, does anyone not know what a full-stack app is? All right, great. Just checking. So AWS Amplify provides a set of tools for front-end developers to build, ship, and scale their apps. So if I walk through what we offer, so we've got previously what was known as the admin UI. Now with the launch of Studio, those two products have combined. We've got a way for you to set up a backend with capabilities such as data, an API, authentication, authorization, file storage, functions. So we have a we have a console called the admin, which was previously called the admin UI, and now it's integrated into Studio. And we had a CLI, which our CLI is what we launched with back in 2017, which allowed you to spin up cloud resources from your local computer in AWS. And then we also have the ability for every capability you set up, we also give you the ability to manage that. So if you build a data model, you're then able to manage the application data. So we have a data manager that gives you lightweight CMS-like capabilities. We just launched some storage capabilities as well, so you can set up file storage, and then you can use the Studio interface to actually manage your files. And then once you set up authentication, you can actually manage your users and groups. So really, what we've so far been focused on has really been around helping you set up a backend and then manage that backend. We have the Amplify libraries. So the Amplify libraries are front-end libraries, and we have them for a whole bunch of frameworks across web, mobile, and hybrid, React Native, and Flutter that allow you to connect to that backend. And then we have Amplify Hosting, a fully managed hosting service with full stack CI/CD. So once you've set up that backend, you built a front end, you can actually deploy your web application, and we give you features such as full stack CI/CD, easy custom domain setup, PR previews. We'll get into more of that in the demo. So these are new capabilities we've launched with Amplify CLI just at reInvent. So one of the major pieces, because now we've been out in the market for a while, one of the major pieces of feedback we've heard is that, hey, what do we do when we want to do something that Amplify doesn't offer? I want to do X, but Amplify only offers Y. Right? And that was one question. The second line of question is like, hey, Amplify provisions everything with infrastructure as code, right? But we would like to use CDK in-house. How do we rationalize these two things together? So the Amplify CLI now supports, there's 3 new capabilities. There's Amplify Override. So what Override does, it actually lets you override Amplify provision services. So let's say when we set up auth, we deploy Amazon Cognito, which is our authentication service. And there's a certain capability set we offer within the Amplify domain. But let's say you want to add something that we don't offer. You can now very easily do it with Amplify Override. Amplify Add Custom gives you access to the 175 plus AWS services that exist, where you can basically run that command, and then you can write CDK to add new functionality to that Amplify backend. And Amplify Export. So this is the third use case. This is a more advanced use case, but it comes from some of our larger customers. They basically have internal DevOps investments with whatever system they're using, but they continue wanting to use Amplify. So the Amplify Export gives them an ability to basically export their definition and easily include it with their own DevOps pipeline, right? And do it in a way where it's not an escape hatch. So they can continue to use Amplify for local testing capabilities such as CodeGen, and environments, get all those benefits without having to exit out of the system. So we have hundreds of thousands of developers use Amplify to build and ship apps faster. Some of them, so companies like Busby and Neiman Marcus, the main reason why people choose Amplify is that it helps them get to market much faster, saves on development time. Because what we're doing is we're setting you up with the cloud backend that is set up in a way that's in line with well-architected AWS practices. The resources that are getting deployed are in your account. We're not giving you a black box where everything is abstracted and where you eventually will hit some ceiling. So that's essentially, we're giving you not just a great starting point, but a ramp to growth. So yeah, as I mentioned, until now, our focus has been primarily to help front-end developers get on the cloud and start using the app backend, start creating and connecting to an app backend. That's where Amplify's focus and all our energy has been over the last 4 years, pretty much. But from talking to customers, we also learned that building UI is time-consuming and a manual process. So let's kind of walk through what that typical workflow looks like for companies. So you have an idea, or you have a feature that you want to build, and it's typically a product manager working with the engineering team, help define the requirements around the feature, and then you work with a UX designer to build designs, and designs are built in tools such as Figma, Sketch, Adobe XD, and then UI designs somehow need to make their way over to the developer, right? So we surveyed over 800 developers, and almost 75% of them said that they work with a designer. A designer plays a very integral part of their overall app development lifecycle. But then what the typical handoff artifact usually is, it's either it could range from things like a PDF to InVision mocks to more advanced things like tools like Zeppelin and such. But the most standard artifact that is handed off is typically a wireframe with a link. And then it's up to the developer to take that wireframe, rationalize that rationalize that entire page into a set of components, lay those components out, bind those components to data, write custom logic on how those components work together. And I mean, that's part of the process, but really like the back and forth that tends to happen with designers, and we see this with our own products too, is that, on the left side is here's the design, and the right side is where the actual product is. So there's always like some loss in communication, and it primarily happens because building the functionality is hard. It's not easy. And functionality is what we all prioritize, even from, speaking as a product manager, when something's not working, I'm going to prioritize like the function over the form, right? And to make sure that's kind of working well. So, but what ends up happening is that design decisions made by a designer tend to get lost in the whole process of of development. So how do you solve this typically? We see two options out there in the market, right? We see an option A, where you build a solution that enables designers to take control end to end, where it's like, okay, a designer can now build an application. And then there's a second option where it says, okay, let's enable developers, and developers can go end to end. Neither really work because they're different skill sets, and there's a reason why we have designers and developers working together to build products. Designers have a specific skill set, and developers have a specific skill set. So what we really need is a solution to help facilitate that designer-developer handoff, ensuring that developers can incorporate close to pixel-perfect UI designs. And that's why we launched Amplify Studio. So we're launching net new capabilities under public preview that help front-end teams accelerate their UI development, in addition to setting up the app backend. So the app backend capabilities I talked about earlier were launched under Admin UI last year at re:Invent. This year, we've taken the UI development capabilities that we've just launched with the backend capabilities we launched last year and put them together into a single product called Amplify Studio. Amplify Studio will help you build visually complete, feature-rich apps faster with full control of the application code, right? Essentially, the workflow we have is you can start, which we will see shortly in the demo, is you can start in Figma. You can have a designer have control over what Figma looks like, sync that into Studio. We automatically generate React code. When I talk about Figma, I'll tell you some of the reasons why now is the right time, because people have been trying to solve this for a long time. Why now is the right time to solve this problem? And then the synced components are actually generated as React code. So we also built a UI library that maps every component to an actual, like we have a button component, and we have a grid, and we have collections, we have layouts. So we have a UI library that actually we use to actually generate code from those Figma designs. So really, Amplify Studio now accelerates the full stack by handling all the heavy lifting required to set up UI components, a backend, and connect the two together. All right, so now's time for me to switch the demo. Wish me luck. All right, to get started, let's head over to the Amplify console. So for those of you who have never used the AWS Amplify console, it's really our control center for everything you deploy within Amplify. So it's available through the AWS Management Console. When you log in, so you have two options. Actually, let me kind of pivot here. So you typically have two options. You can start with Studio. You can get started with hosting. So Amplify hosting will allow you to take your existing web application, deploy it with CI/CD, and then you can add capabilities from Studio into your app. Or you can get started with Studio. In this case, I'm getting started with Studio already, so I've already kind of deployed this demo application. It's a shell right now, but this is what the AWS Amplify console looks like. You have hosting environments, and you have backend environments. So what this interface allows you to do is it allows you to actually manage all the different environments you have. So if you're trying to deploy production, trying to have a dev test production environment, you can do all that through the AWS Amplify console. And you can access Studio through here. So one interesting fact about Studio is that everything that we create through Studio, Studio is actually hosted externally. So you can give access to your team members without actually requiring them to have an AWS account. So I can go ahead and actually just invite myself, and I can just give my Gmail doc address. For some reason, I thought it was a smart idea to put when I was born in my Gmail address. And then I can actually I don't need that right now, but I can access Studio through any email account. So what this enables, and we see this is how we see teams using it, is that there's someone who has access to the AWS console, and they don't want to give access to all their team members. So all the team members get access to Studio through any email. So at this point, from the AWS console, I can just directly open Studio. I don't need to log in. But if I did open this in an incognito window, I'd get like a login screen, and I would be able to enter my login information. All right. So this is where we're at with the homepage of Studio. There's a bunch of options you see here, from setting up a data model to then viewing like your app content, setting up auth. But really what we're here to do is start with building UI. So here's what we have to get started. So we say that we have a Figma file as well available to you. So really all you need to do to get started is you could use your own Figma file, but if you use our Figma template, you'll have a better end-to-end experience for sure, just because our Figma template, which I'll show you right now. Sorry. Our Figma template, which you duplicate, has primitives, and we also provide a set of pre-built components. So I'll skip over the getting started README. But every primitive you see here, so if I zoom in, you've got badge, you've got button, pagination. So if I look at button, right? Right, so with button, I have a set of, let me actually go into, pull a button in. So here's the button I have. I have a set of variants, that Figma has the variants, so I can switch between a large button, I can switch between a small button, and we have a default button, and then I have different states for that button. I can say, is this a primary button, is this a link button? And these Figma variants, so Figma, actually, before I kind of jump ahead, Figma has the concept of components, and it introduced the concept of components for the same reason developers have components. So designers don't get lost rebuilding the same button 100,000 times, right? So what we've done is we've built a set of primitives in code. So this button has a corresponding button in our Amplify UI library, right? So if I head over to the Amplify UI library, which we also just launched, and I find the button, you can see that the button has a set of props. There's a variation prop, there's a size prop, loading text, and that more or less, we've not mapped everything, but that more or less maps one-to-one with the variants you see here in Figma, right? And then what we have is we've given you an ability to then use those primitives to actually build more components. So to get started, we give you a set of pre-built components. So these are components. This can be an e-commerce cart component. This can be a listing component. We've got more complex ones like, again, more different types of listing components. This is a social media component. You've got a newsfeed component, another social media one, profile, forms. So all of these components, and then if I move down here, we've got marketing components, different layouts for marketing pages. We've got feature pages as well, so you can have feature components if you want. Pricing components, more forms. We've got product details, checkout forms, and some navigation elements like a nav bar, a sidebar, a footer, and FAQs. The good news is if you don't like anything we provide, you can throw them all out and build your own using the primitives we have. For this demo, what I'm going to do, I could very easily use one of the pre-built components here, but I'm actually going to go ahead and build a new component to show you. There are some constraints, obviously, around how you build components, so it syncs to Studio well as code. So to start off, I'm going to be building a recipe, like a recipe demo, like a recipe listing demo for today. So to start off, what I need really is I need a frame. So everything you build in Studio, build for Studio needs to start with a frame. A frame becomes like your parent container for your component. And inside that frame, what I want is an image, right? So let me paste that here. And then underneath that, I'm going to have a title for that image. And now I can create a component out of this. All I need to do to create a component is I right-click, I hit Create Component. Let's name it Recipe. And here's an important setting, auto layout. So Figma has capabilities for auto layout that basically allows you to set, I can set a vertical direction, I can set a horizontal direction, I can define, I believe this is padding. I can define like margins between items. I can basically define like the layout. So this actually maps very closely to how a Flex works. So a Flexbox works. So that's what we use. So we use auto layout. So when you're building components, auto layout is a very key ingredient to building a component successfully. All right, so we've built, so I'm gonna just leave it here, so I'll call this recipe name, just so it shows up a little nicer. And now all we really need to do to get this into Studio, let me give this a name, this file a better name, because as you can imagine, I've duplicated a lot of these files. All I need to do to get those components is I paste a URL in. I'd continue. And fingers crossed that this works. And now what we have is we have an import process where you can actually see the components imported one by one. So these are basically all the components that exist in that file. And this is actually rendered as React code. If I were to inspect element and you look at this, you would actually see like code. So this is the real rendering, and we're also rendering this component the way we have interpreted it. Right. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit accept all for now. And there you have it. So we've got a component, like this is our social media component, and if you look at how it's rendered here versus how it's rendered in Figma, it's pretty close. This is the Figma component. This is what we rendered. We rendered an image placeholder. We don't bring in the image from Figma, And we'll get more to the binding of images later on in the demo. All right. Now that I brought this in, let's take a look at my recipe component as well. All right, so that's my recipe component, pretty straightforward component. Before I go and before I actually go and show the next part, which is linked to the data modeling, why don't I actually just pull these components down into my application? So what I have here is a very basic Create React app. I just set it up before this demo. If I go to localhost, it's just running Create React app. Now, all I need to do is I need to go to my command line and run Amplify. So this is where the Amplify CLI comes in. So if I have not installed the CLI before, I would have to install the Amplify CLI and then run an Amplify pull. And what the Amplify pull would do is it'll connect to my Studio instance and fetch all my backend definition and all my UI components as well. So when this pull completes, my UI components in my application will be populated. And what I'm going to do then is show you what that looks like. While the pull is happening, why don't I actually go ahead and open up how you would use this component. So using this component would be pretty, well, after the initial project setup is very straightforward. You basically just run an Amplify pull, you import the component, and then you would just use it wherever you want to. But given we're doing the initial setup, step one was install the CLI and then install our Amplify library, UI library. And then there's a bunch of imports you have to set up in your app.js. So let's go ahead and do that right now while we wait. I've got this imports in place, Amplify provider, to wrap my app with Amplify provider. All right. So at this point, I've got a whole set of UI components here. And if I go to my recipe component, what you'll notice is that my recipe component is built with a Flex. There's a Flex component. Flex has an image. There's another text component built in here. So all of this, we have ES6 JavaScript versions of it, as well as TypeScript exports, which I'm not seeing right now, but we also have TypeScript. We basically have TypeScript exports of these as well. So now let's try and use it in my application. So to use it in my application, all I had to do was import the recipe. Is my screen too small? Should I zoom in? I think so. Yeah. Let me just replace everything that's in here with now if I were to go to my application, all right, so pretty basic component right now. There's no image. I haven't linked it with any image, but there's a it's essentially what I set up in Studio. So if I were to get back to Studio, here's the component, the recipe component, and my component has basically a name and a price field. So that's kind of what I'm seeing here on my localhost. So at this point, if I kind of I'll pause here and kind of talk about what I've done so far. I set up UI components in Figma, sync them to Studio, pull them into my application. Now in order to actually make these UI components usable in some way, what we need to do is we need to power them with some sort of data. So Amplify provides the ability for you to set up a backend data model as well. So if you've not used the admin UI in the last year, this is the capability that we launched last year with the admin UI. And what you can do is very easily define a data model. So in this case, if I call it a recipe and give it a title, give it a description, and then I give it an image URL, right? So I can define different types for each of my fields. I can also make this more complex. So let's say I wanted to do a recipe has many comments for my recipe, right? I could also do that here, and I could kind of keep building on making this model more complicated and define relationships between the two, right? So I can see a recipe has, a comment. There's actually what I would do is one recipe has many comments here. So I would say the way a recipe one recipe has many comments, and I could save that relationship, right? Then deploy it. I think for this demo, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep it simple and just keep it to a single recipe component, a recipe model. And once I hit save and deploy, what's going to happen here is that we're actually under the hood using the Amplify CLI to deploy your backend, right? So here we're setting up a GraphQL API endpoint. You get a DynamoDB table, and all of this is done with infrastructure as code. So it takes a little bit to deploy, really, because it's setting you up with best practices, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cheat and pivot over to an application I've already deployed, which is the one you're seeing here, where the data model is already set up. And now what I can do is I can actually then easily add content to that backend. So we have this data manager view that gives you an easy way to, let's say, add new recipes. So if I wanted to add a new recipe like pasta with meatballs. I'm hungry. And then I could find an image somewhere and then just use it with, just provide that image inline. Sorry. And there we saved it. So the way we see a lot of customers using this content view is actually because we also have a Markdown editor, you can also use it as a lightweight CMS. It's not a full-blown CMS, but it gives you capabilities such as Markdown editing, right? You can actually, through here, define relationships between your different. So if I had a recipe and comments, so within the same interface, I can say create a recipe and link these comments. I can also then automatically generate seed data. So we have with seed data, I can say, okay, let's add 100 rows. I'm not going to do it right now, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like. I can say, let's add 100 rows, and I can add constraints. And we recently launched an integration with Faker.js. Have anyone here heard Faker.js? So Faker.js really allows you to generate data that looks real, right? So if I say a title, I can actually say, okay, it's actually a first name, and it'll generate like a whole bunch of records with title looking like a first name. Right, so it helps you, instead of generating a bunch of lorem ipsum data, it generates real data. And I'm just going to switch to another app I have where I've actually set up a whole bunch of things. I've set up data. I've set up auth. So we also have authentication where you can set up authentication with email, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple sign-in. You can set up rules like multi-factor auth, and then you can also then manage your users and groups through the same interface. So very common thing we hear people doing is that once you've set up auth, all you need to do is basically have an admin manage users and groups. So we have that capability as well. We just launched file storage capabilities. So you can set up set up S3 through our interface. Define what your users can do. So sign-in users can authorization rules around what users can do. So sign-in users in this case can do everything. Guest users can only view. And similarly, we also have a file browser experience, which we have that will give you as you upload files, you'll be able to view. This is currently in preview as well. You'll be able to see files that are actually within here. You'll be able to very easily upload files. And then once you upload a file, you'll be able to actually view all the relevant information that you typically need from an S3 file through this interface. Cool, so now that I've set up this data model, what I'm going to go is I'm going to go back to this recipe component. I'm just going to refresh my page. Oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong. This is the app I was looking for. Yeah, so I'm going to go to my recipe component, right? And I'm actually going to configure it to actually point to my backend data. So this is our UI component editor view. So what you get here is you've got this left nav here is your element tree. So every layer you saw in Figma is now mapped to a UI primitive we have. So for example, the image component that I created there is actually an image UI primitive we have. So what I can very easily do is I can, at the component level, and I can set properties for my components. So very similar to React, I can define a property. I can say I have a recipe property. I can give it a type. And it automatically shows my data model. So I can say this is a recipe. This is a recipe type. And then when I select I can select the different components within this editor. So that gives me a live preview. So I can set the properties. So all the properties you're seeing here are actually all properties linked to the image component itself. So when I set the source prop, what I can do is I can say, okay, the source prop links to the recipe image URL, and just refresh the page. And there you go. So like this image is actually rendering from something I have in my backend, right? And then I can link this to this text as a label, and I can link it to the recipe title. And I forgot I actually had this pricing component in a different Figma file, which is why it's showing up. But I don't want this pricing component because my recipe app doesn't have a pricing component. So what I can do is I can actually just set a property, because as a developer, you'll still get full control over this component. So I can say property, and I can just say display none. And I can do that. If I wanted to, let's say, in theory, have a pricing component, right? I could also do things that were slightly more complicated. With this property editor, we allow you to do things where, so let's say for your label, I wanted my label to have a description, right? But I wanted to, instead of the description, what I actually wanted to do was say, okay, this label starts with description, and then I can concatenate it. Sorry. And then I can concatenate it with the recipe description. So then what this would update is that, actually, let me put a description and put a space so it looks a little better. So I can do some, I can basically concatenate some data here. I can also set some sort of conditional logic. So if I can say that if this label equals this value, then set the color to red. So we have like some sort of lightweight expression builder logic that you can make use of in this component editor. Great. So now that I've done that, I can also then now shuffle the data to see what it looks like with different types of data from my backend. So this is all data that you're actually seeing that's being rendered in the backend. And as you can see, these images are kind of not rendering perfectly. So let me actually also set a width property where I say width is 100%. Right? So now this looks a little better, right? And so this gives you an easy way to just check your component. My title, I want my title to look a little bolder. So I can set a font weight. Let's do 800. That didn't work. Oops. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so I can set different font weights as well. I'm gonna remove the description for now because I don't really want it. And I'm actually gonna hide this. I'm just gonna hide this. All right. That's the component I want. and I'm now happy with a single component. But really what I want to render in my application is I want to render a whole collection. I don't just want to render the single component. So what I can do in this, what I can do through here is I can create a collection. Let's call it a recipe collection. And now this will basically now render data from my backend. So if you look at all the data I have in my data manager, I think I have, right now we're limiting the number of records we show, but all the data you see here is actually live data. And I can set a list, set it in a list view or a grid view. I can define an order, right? I can also then, I want like a padding. I can set, I can basically set a padding between items. And then from the data set, I can also say, okay, I want to automatically sort all my data in ascending order from the title, title. So I want everything alphabetic. I can also define, if I wanted to, I could define a filter. I could say that, in this case, I don't have a price, but like if I had a price field and I only wanted to show certain records, I could filter the data down to a specific number of records. Great. So now, how do we get this into our application? Yep, we just pivot back here, run another amplify pull. And hopefully, we get the new recipe collection in our app. It's generating the UI components. OK, did you guys see a new recipe collection? So this recipe collection, it's a collection type, and we've generated it's automatically. We've got this hook for you. We basically use data store binding that allows you that actually maps everything, all the items from the recipe model to the collection. Now, in order for me to actually use this in my application, I can just do that. Oh, actually, I need to import it. Import the recipe collection. Save it. Let's go back to our app. Okay, what have I done wrong here? Right, did I? I don't quite know why it's not working. This is the problem with live demos sometimes. What I will do, just for the sake of the demo, is actually switch to an application that I've deployed recently. I just did right before this, also, which is basically the same. So I'm going to actually let me try one last thing. Let me try restarting the server. If that doesn't work, then I'll switch to the application that I have that's very similar. All right. Yeah, so let me just switch to the application that I have already deployed. Just make sure that this is using this has also got a recipe list. And All right, so there's our collection rendering right within this view as well. And so this is actually, I basically just duplicated the backend with a separate app, which is why the data is all the same, right? And now the good thing here is that I can actually, I have full control over this application code in my app, right? So I can very easily, so over here what I've done is I set a flex I use the Amplify UI library, so the UI library we have here. If I did not have the flex here, right, this component would then just render as in a way where it just takes this entire screen, and as you resize it, it's because I used auto layout to set up the component, so that's why the component resizes. So if I change the size of the screen, this component resizes. But what I really wanted is that I wanted it to be the content to be centered. So as a developer, I have complete control over this, right? Which is very novel with a lot of the tooling that exists out there, because you either have no control, or the levers of control you have require to learn a lot of new stuff. So over here, you're dealing with this just like you would with any React component. I got the recipe list component that came down from Studio. I went to the UI docs. I went to the collection. I went to go see collections. I saw that collections have a prop for what prop I'm using, Gap. So I added a Gap prop, right? I also want to be able to, let's say I want to add pagination, right? Adding pagination is just, I can just basically copy a prop in here and say, is items paginated? Let's put 2 items per page. And what you'll see is, now you've got pagination in your app, right? And it's rendering all the data. So you're able to get all this functionality. So a designer built a component, you synced it into your code, and really you're able to override it and extend it however you want, right? And we've got, this is just one scenario, but we've got a whole set of docs in our production in our deployed app that tells you how to extend code. So you can you can extend it via the props the way I did. We also have an overrides prop. So all the generated code, they have a way for you to set an override prop. So for every single child component. So if you wanted to, let's say, override the button color, because for whatever reason, you'd be able to actually set an overrides prop on the collection and then override the button color using the button prop, right? You can also modify the generated code, but not one important caveat is that we overwrite whatever we create. But the way you would modify the generated code is actually just create a new, duplicate the component and basically change it, and then we would not overwrite anything in that folder. We've got a whole bunch of use cases around how you would make components responsive, right? So we also have a nav bar. So if I were to add a nav bar in here, right? Then my nav bar would show up here in my recipe app. Oh, I need it outside the flex. What am I missing? Oh. For my flex. Oh, no, I see. Someone help me with what I'm doing wrong. Where should I be putting it? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So basically, you're saying put a div on top and then put the nav bar inside. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I could do that. I could also then I could also then just take this recipe item. Let me just simplify it right now for the demo, and tag a nav bar on top. Oh, I still need a wrapping. Thanks for the help. All right, so there we have a navbar component, and now, like this navbar is not responsive, so I can set a width prop on the navbar to be 100 VW, I think. And now it'll kind of move with me. So you have a lot of flexibility and control over what you do inside of Studio. And so that's kind of the end-to-end demo of Studio from start to finish. Sorry I had a little hiccup in the middle, but overall, I hope that was informative. We have 3 more minutes, so I'm happy to kind of take any questions from people. Way back there.
Is it possible to use a different data source, so to connect it to an existing API?
So not currently. So that's something that's in our roadmap. Actually, what I forgot to talk about, so the UI capabilities right now are in preview, right? So what we are, let me just skip over all this stuff here. What we are going to have from now to GA is we're going to have a whole bunch of functionality that to fit this. So like you'll be able to define events and event-based actions in Studio. So you'll be able to say, OK, on a button click, you can do this right now in code. You can have a form, and you can say override the button to say, OK, on click, write to data. But post-GA, our plan is to better support existing data sources. It's like one of the top things we have in our mind. Sure, right, up front. Good question. We have to figure that out. we've been desperately trying to get the Figma to the UI piece work really well, but our current plan is because our React components have event-based actions, like you can define events on the components, right? We don't need to use Figma, but Figma is definitely, given they have that capability, it would be cool. So it's something that we're still evaluating. Good question. It's setting up an API. So the database that I deployed set up an API, and all the data that I set up in my content view is all dynamic. So if you have an app that's uploading data, it would just automatically render. Over there. Well, so if I show you if I switch to the Amplify UI slide, and I go back here. Right, so if I switch to Amplify UI, what you'll see is that we've called out 3 frameworks there, right? Right now we started with React, but our goal is to basically build these cross-framework. So the moment we have support in any of the next frameworks, like we will be able to have support in Studio as well. Over there. I'm sorry, say that again? Yeah, so that's interesting. So the earlier version, so the Amplify UI as a library, we offered like an authenticator component. That was our main component. The previous version of the authenticator did use web components, and we actually made a decision to move to support specific frameworks, just because like the developer experience, there were a bunch of little gotchas when you kind of export it to different frameworks. So I think to answer your question, our current plan is to support React, Angular, Vue, and we're not going down that web component route for now. Yeah. So right now it's in public preview. There's no charge to it. We've not yet made any official announcement on like pricing, but all the backend stuff, all the tooling itself is free to use right now. So you set up, but any of the resources that we create, you get charged for. Cool. I think we're at time. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out, and hope this was informative.